Hi everyone, my name is Kenzie Dodds and I'm super thrilled to be joined with my new friend here, Paul Henschel. Say hi, Paul.
I
So Paul and I, we actually haven't interacted a ton, but I've followed you on Twitter for the last year or two. Just been blown away by the really cool stuff that you've been building with React 3 Fiber, which it wasn't always that. Like you were doing some 3D stuff with React before that custom renderer was a thing. Is that right? Or maybe it was harder to write a custom renderer back when you started. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Something like this. It started because of my work. We do like industrial design stuff like this,
Mm,
CAD, and it just became too complex. I was always making UI in React, but the other stuff that had to do with 3D, I just couldn't, or it didn't really fit in well. So
mm.
I had these both clashing things that I wanted to reconcile somehow. That's how the renderer started.
I see. Okay. And this was before making custom renderers was like a supported thing by React, right? This was several years ago, right?
No, actually not. I did
Okay.
write a custom reconciler before. That was before I think React 16 or whatever.
Mm.
Uh, Fiber, I guess they call it. But no, I waited until this thing was public. I think it started in a GitHub issue, and some people developed it further. So I followed it, and eventually they made a pre-release for beta testing. And I thought this was it. This can solve all my problems.
No, awesome. Awesome. Well,
Hmm?
before we get too far down that train, I want to just get to know you a little bit. So, you want to tell us like who you are, where you come from, where you work and all that, whatever else you want to say.
All right. So I'm in Germany, but I work in Switzerland. Um, I'm like developing open source for several years now. It started actually with Android. I got some smartphone. The first one that I ever got was an Android, and I started hacking, and this kind of sparked the interest in me to develop something that other people like. We had like some huge project out there, but doesn't matter now. But eventually it got a little bit hard. All the issues came in, and I saw myself like working day and night. So I stopped open source for several years, and I guess React again it like rekindled my interest. So coding was fun again. I could prototype quickly, and everything I did, like at home, in private, or at the company, I thought if there's anyone that could reuse this idea, I will make it an open source library. The first one that I published was React Spring, then
Mm.
followed use gesture, Zustand, all the others. Most of what you see on the React Spring GitHub organization. So all these were like simple little ideas that I started at work. They're super nice. They gave me permission. They said, okay, it benefits them. Uh, and it benefits me because I get to have some fun. And now most of my work, I guess, is in the open. So it's, I guess, a little bit unusual.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's what I do nowadays. Like mostly open source.
That's awesome that your work lets you do that. And is this like are these projects that you're using at work as well? And so that's why like there's a synergy there or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea behind it. So everything I develop, uh, it eventually had there was a problem that we couldn't solve, or something had to be made easier for us. So this is how it started. And yes, of course, all our products they based on the stuff that I'm doing open source, like React 3 Fiber, mainly React Spring, Zustand. They're all employed in our company work.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that was pretty similar to open source that I did when I was at PayPal was because we were using those things at PayPal. It's kind of nice
Oh,
when the company is open-minded enough to realize that it doesn't matter where the code goes, like where it's
yes.
hosted, just matters that it's furthering our mission.
Yeah, I
So
agree. Awesome.
yeah, it's great. So you mentioned that you like started coding, then you kind of fell out of it, out of interest, or like things just became overwhelming. Then you came back into it when React became popular, and you said it React made it fun again. What was it about React, do you think, that made coding, like rekindled the interest in coding for you?
I guess it just suits my mental model. Uh, yeah, I've done lots of frameworks before, like Angular, Vue, some others before that. But I always thought that all the boilerplate or certain structures, it didn't suit me pretty well. So I had an idea in my head, and I just couldn't just go and implement it. So coding was kind of a churn, like a burden. That's how I
Hmm.
felt. And React, I don't know what happened. I mean, in the beginning, I was totally against it. I saw JSX, like so many got this kind of JSX shock. I thought, what the hell is this? I couldn't read or parse the components because at this time I didn't actually know what is a real component. I was just dealing with directives and all this stuff.
Right.
So it was
Yeah.
pretty new, and eventually it became so big that I couldn't avoid it. I tried, and it just blew my mind. I saw, I think, on Egghead, the first one that I saw, starting React or something like this was called. And in the middle of this video, it was like half an hour. I pressed pause. I stopped it. Uh, I closed down the tab, opened like a React project, like they suggested, and I just could go. It was
Hmm.
amazing to me. I mean, I had to study Angular like, I don't know, weeks and months to learn the API by memory. And all this just vanished. I just had a couple of APIs, I could utilize them, and that felt really good. So I immediately liked it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. That like React's API surface area is quite small relative
Mm.
to other frameworks. But I think there's an argument to be made for, like, part of the reason for that is because React is such a small portion of what you'd need for a bigger application. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, I also, I mean, it resonates with me because I value simplicity more than anything else. And I think that if you have like a stack or a piece of software, it should just do one thing and it should do it well, like Unix philosophy. And at least in my opinion, React is pretty good at doing this. I mean, it's a view, it's made by function, the logic is there, state is cut off from it. It's pretty genius to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's awesome.
I
That's
also
great.
think that there's something that you can see in the React ecosystem that just does not happen elsewhere. Uh, like the insane amount of packages and tools and libraries that people create. It just doesn't exist like this in other spaces, in other frameworks. And I think this is one of the reason. Uh, I mean, React doesn't dictate, for instance, router, animation, whatever. All these things, if you wanted to fixate them, uh, I think essentially what you're doing is stopping innovation because requirements or our needs, all this progresses on a daily basis. So React doesn't do it. Hence, the ecosystem flourishes, I think.
Yeah, I actually would agree with that. Yesterday there was a thread where people were comparing external contributors to the React project
Mhm.
versus, how many external contributors there are on other frameworks, and somebody gave a couple of reasons why that might be, which seemed to make some sense. But I replied with an additional reason, which is that React has just taken this one slice of what an application needs and just says, we're going to work on this by
Mhm.
itself, and that's like the core. So if you're comparing it to like Angular, this would be like the core template and whatever. I don't know what they call those things, but
Mhm.
like external contributors typically don't contribute to that portion of Angular. They contribute to all the stuff around it. And
Yeah.
so because React try to solve those other problems, there aren't as many contributors to the core. But like overall in the ecosystem, there are vast amounts of contributors to the extra stuff that you typically need for a React app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Um, Also, I'm not sure. There's something to be said about design choices, vision, and I think one of the principles of React is to just be a abstract component standard. And I think that may just have been contributing to its success. I mean, React is everywhere. I guess people don't want to see it like this right now because it's still like web focused. But at least for the stuff that I'm doing, I'm mostly aware that React happens everywhere, and this should be like cherished. And if you
Mm-hmm.
start to implement high-level abstracts or worse, platform abstracts into React, I don't think it's a good thing because you tying it to a particular platform. And I'm not sure. I think it's pretty nice as it is. Also, if there's really something that you're looking for, there's mostly like one established choice, like for routing or whatever.
Mm.
And if not, then all the better.
Right. Yeah. Well, and
Mm.
the cool thing is that because it's not built in, people work on the problem, and
Yes.
there's a huge amount of people. Whereas if React did decide to bake things in, then people wouldn't work on the problem. They'd work around the problems that are in the built-in version, right? So
Yeah.
like it's possible to use a different animation library with Vue or a different router or whatever.
Mm.
But people don't because there's a built-in solution. And if it doesn't quite work for them, then they'll just find ways to work around it. Whereas if it's not built in, then people are more encouraged to build their own solution. And that's where the
Mm.
innovation comes in.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I'm not sure if you're aware of PopMotion. I guess Framer Motion for sure, but the predecessor was PopMotion, and the guy Matt Perry, I think. He tried it because he got requests. People said, okay, we want it also for Vue, and we want it for vanilla JS and so on. So he split his efforts into pieces, and he starts like offering his library for like the Vue ecosystem, the space. But I don't know. I saw the npm stats, and that was pretty crazy because PopMotion is a huge library in React, but for Vue, no one is using it. And you see the same, like mostly replicated for all the popular libraries that exist in the React space. Some may exist like styled components and so on, but no one's really using it because they have one baked in solution, and the solution may work for some people, but may also be very like limited for others. And
mm,
this is what I really love about React. Also, I think we have all seen how this model to bake things in can like go wrong. Like with the web, they had so many specs that didn't work out. Now everyone's like against web components because they don't fulfill requirements or whatever. I don't want to get into this, but you just see that something's wrong. Someone sits down in the meeting room like 10 years ago and decides some high level thing. But everything, our environment changes and our requirements and needs. And then this thing that I developed just doesn't hold, it doesn't suit. So that's the danger of this model.
mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the cool things that, as you were saying earlier, that's really impressive about React is its ability to be just this thin abstraction over of a component model, and that component model can be used all over the place. And you are one of the people who have taken it beyond just the DOM and put it into something greater. So I'd love to talk about that, specifically like Three.js 3D in the browser.
Mhm.
And like one thing in particular that I'm interested in is like, what was it that made you decide to reach for React for this? Because I know that especially for things like 3D or graphing or like things with lots of
Mhm.
parts, people are always screaming, React is slow. Like, why would you use React for something like this?
Yeah, I know this very well. I don't know. I just recognized that the same problems that we're solving with React for the DOM, it just applies to everything. So there's actually, before I thought like a game would be completely different. It would be like irrational using React for something like this, or really just 3D or anything that isn't a DOM. But now I'm pretty convinced that that was foolish. The problems are the same. So a game is essentially a state engine, state machine. I mean, so like everything else, like forms and really React takes something, makes a component out of it. It's self-managed. You can reutilize it every way you want. So it's completely encapsulated. So that's pretty great. And I actually think that for something like Three.js, it actually makes more sense than a DOM, because Three.js, as I said often, it's not principled. It's very like far out. There's so many objects you need to keep track of. It's not like the DOM, you create one little thing, it's a div, and then you put it in there. You say append, and then it's in there. It's not like Three.js works. You have something, and this something is like wired into everything else. You have setup, you have render loop, you have resize, you have events. So this little thing that you created, let's say visual primitive, could be a box or whatever, it's everywhere in the code base. And if you've ever seen like Three.js snippets and examples, they're insane. They're like unreadable because everything is connected to everything. And yeah, React just completely solves it, just like it did with the DOM. But here it's even more maybe apparent. I don't know if that's the right word, but you can really see the code shrinking. In a DOM, it's also a lot, but in Three.js, I think you, in the end, if you have a big application, you can cut out like 70% or something. So
Wow.
it's a lot. It's a lot cleaner as well.
Yeah, so you take this library that has an imperative API by design,
Mhm.
and probably would struggle to not have an imperative API. You know, at some point there's
Mhm.
got to be some imperativeness, like at some level of the abstraction. Eventually, we're going to get to zeros and ones. um, but you were able to put a declarative API on top of that.
I think it's even both, because there were things like this before. They use React. They wrap every component that Three.js makes, so it's not a renderer. So they have like 300, 400 components. It's impossible to maintain.
Hmm.
But this whole thing just blurts out some static graph. So it's pretty. I don't want to say useless because someone's made it, but we just didn't think it would suit our needs. So the imperative nature is super important. You need reference to the actual things that you made, mesh, whatever, but you also need to be able to mutate it, to animate it. You don't do this declaratively. And this is something we have learned with animated in React Native, with React Spring. Framer Motion has picked this up, so it's a pretty useful thing. There's no real I don't know means in React for this, but lots of libraries, they have seen that some things they need the imperative nature, and this is perfectly solved by hooks. There's one hook in particular, it's called useFrame in React Fiber, and this allows a component to hook into the render loop, so you can spin around something, whatever. But if this component unmounts, it takes out this effect. So even that is self-managed. Before this, I'm sure you have heard of a game loop, right?
Yes.
Like a huge encompassing loop where everything is happening. So basically it's a salad because it needs to know about everything. And this is broken up in React with hooks. So you have like the declarative nature, the graph, the tree is written out like this, but you can interact on it, mutate stuff in a safe way, of course, through hooks, which is pretty crazy. So before hooks, React Fiber wouldn't have been possible, I think.
Yeah. It's hooks were definitely in the category of enabling technologies, I think.
Yeah. Mhm.
So I'm interested in like I haven't used React 3 Fiber, and so like this could maybe reveal some of that for you. But I'm curious with the tree structure of a component of the React component model,
Mhm.
how does that map to a 3D thing that you're trying to create? I'm also interested in this like from a VR perspective as well, because it's a very similar type of
Mhm.
environment. We've got a 3D environment that is nothing like a tree structure, but then we're writing our code in a tree structure. How does that work?
The fun thing is that actually it is a tree structure. Even in 3JS, you have something like a scene. Think of it in DOM terms as your body,
Hmm.
like a container element or whatever. And then you just put stuff in it. You put in a mesh. A mesh describes something that's visual. This mesh has a geometry. It's all you can think as little nodes. So you have scene, you have the mesh. The mesh contains a geometry. Geometry defines what it is, how it looks or not how it looks like the form, the volume. Could
Hmm.
be sphere, I don't know, could be a complex model. And then you have a material, which is also part of the mesh. Material says this thing's red or this thing, I don't know, shiny.
Hmm.
And you just build lots of these little nodes. And basically, it's the same as diffs and spans. It's just different primitives.
Hmm. So, like, do you typically see a lot of nesting happening? Like, for one thing that I'm thinking about is like, let's say that
Hmm?
um, you're writing some sort of like animation of like different balls floating around, but then and so you can structure that where like each ball is just a direct child of that scene.
Hmm.
But then maybe the ball, you decide you want one of the balls to break into multiple other balls or something like that. Like, how would you just like think ahead and have an individual ball for each like I don't know. I'm just trying to see how I could structure that because normally I would say, okay, if I have this one thing and then there are things inside of it, so I'll nest those in there. But if I want those things to come out of that, then I would need to change where they're being rendered. Maybe
Hmm?
this question isn't making sense. I'm not sure if, if you can make sense of that.
I mean, it makes sense. It's just I think the error that the mistake that you make is that you think of 3JS or whatever as something completely different than a DOM. It's really
Hmm.
not. It's like the same principle. You have a div, it's a sidebar. You load in a component. If this component is generic enough, you say, okay, I make it like my master, and I can reuse it like a button. If it's not so generic, then it's just like a parental component, like something that encapsulates several buttons or whatever. So
Hmm.
it's the same thing in the 3D space. So these
Hmm.
things they can have children. Actually, it's if you know what a mesh is, a geometry and a sphere, uh, a material. Uh, you could just go and build like basic stuff. And the rules and principles, they're the same, exactly the same like in a DOM.
That just makes me want to go build something. That's very
Yeah,
cool.
you should try it.
Yeah, this is one of the beauties of React is that there are a couple of awesome side effects to this. So like React can be used anywhere, really. Like
Mm.
you've got VR native and you know 3JS. There's Ink, which is a renderer for the terminal. Like there,
Yeah,
it's amazing what we can where we can take this component model.
yeah,
And so because of that, two things happen. I, as a web developer, can now enter these other spaces that I would have
mm,
no business in otherwise. And then people who are already in those spaces can now use these superior tools for modeling these kinds of things and then move them once they've learned it there they can now start moving all over so you get this cross-pollination of
yes,
really interesting ideas.
yes. And I think it's even crazier than this. Again, this is all like frontier stuff. Like not so many people are involved with custom renderers, but if you are, you notice certain patterns. And for instance, one of the things that immediately like blew my mind is that I noticed I can use any React library that I want. Because React does not, like, imagine a animation library. It does not animate divs and spans. It animates React components. So
Hmm.
immediately you take something out of the React ecosystem and you say, now you, I don't know, animate in ink. What's that? What do they have? Boxes? I have
Uh-huh,
never
yeah.
used ink, but you just code and this is amazing. Or let it be a mesh. You can rotate it, change color, whatever. So there's cross pollination, unlike everything I've seen before. Because in Three.js or in all these contained platforms and ecosystems, they just have theirs, and there's a couple of people working on this. It's not so big, and if they want to animate something, something has to be specifically made for this purpose. But in
Hmm.
React, everything like handles or deals with the components itself. And this is magical to me.
Yeah, that is mind blowing, especially with hooks, right?
Yeah,
Before hooks, it was a lot harder to do this kind of cross pollination
exactly.
or code sharing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh man, this is good stuff. So another thing that I was kind of curious about is where do you get when you're building these things, and for folks who are watching, definitely go take a look at the React 3 Fiber GitHub repo, because there's a bunch of demos of like amazing things that I'm like, there's no way that React built this, but apparently you can do this with React.
Mm.
I'm curious, where do you get your designs and materials and different things like that, your assets, 3D assets? What's like, if I decide I want to go build something, I'll probably start with just moving spheres around or spinning
Mhm.
boxes and stuff. But if I wanted to actually build something legit, where do you typically go to get those kinds of assets?
Yeah, it depends on what you want to make. I guess most people think of something like gimmicky, uh, like a 3D game.
Hmm.
You think of like flying dragons or whatever, but doesn't even have to be like this. Have you ever seen? I never know how to pronounce this website, AWWW Awards.
Yeah, I don't know. That sounds, yeah, awards.
But I'm sure you've seen it, all these crazy websites that you just know you just couldn't replicate. They're like wobbling stuff around, like flying planes,
Hmm.
made by these crazy design agencies. And I don't know, you don't need like dragons and fireballs for this. It's just meshes, planes, images, but you have the added benefit of having a camera. It can be a perspective camera. You have the Z-axis, so you have like natural parallax. You have
Hmm.
shaders. All these things are now possible. But if you want to make a game, there's so many like places you can get models from. Google, I don't know, poly.google, I think, Polygon, I don't know. Uh, most people will find it. I forgot the name. And there's also Sketchfab, which is also pretty cool. So lots of places where you can just download ready-made models. But if you really want to dig in, you can learn Blender. It's a horribly complex software. I tried to learn it, followed some tutorials. I can do some basic stuff, but I basically gave up. But for what I want to do, it's enough. It's
Hmm.
amazing if you can do it, because this would actually enable you to make real games. And there's
Hmm.
so many assets then that you can do. There's like ready-made skeletons, I think they call it.
Hmm.
You make your own model, you put a skeleton on it, and then you can download like movements and all the stuff. So
Wow,
this is if you
interesting.
want to make a game, but I'm not so into games. I tried. I made actually a couple. They're also on this GitHub repo,
Hmm.
but I'm more interested in the front end space. Like
Hmm.
there's so many great designers in the React space. They make amazing things, but still limited by what the DOM can do. And the DOM is also very slow.
Hmm.
So the DOM chokes if you try to I don't know, shift 10 diffs across the screen.
Hmm.
There's always lag. Matt Perry recently, I think on Twitter, he said browser vendors even throttle request animation frame or something like this. So it's pretty terrible. The DOM is slow. It always looks like kind of bland. The only thing you can hype it up is with great layouts, typography, and so on.
Right.
But if you really want to go like overboard, over the edge, then you can get shaders and the craziest stuff. And this is possible in Three.js, pretty easy actually.
Hmm. So I'm curious also, like when we're doing 3D stuff,
Mhm.
how do you make that accessible? You know, can you with like a screen reader? Are there any APIs
Mhm.
for and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is built on top of WebGL, right? Like that's
Yeah.
what Three.js is working with. So are there
Mhm.
WebGL primitives for accessibility?
No,
Yeah,
but
that really clinks it. Or
yeah,
that's too bad.
it's possible. And if you go to these professionally made agency websites, they have it, but they only get it by mixing the DOM and WebGL, which is very
Mm.
interesting to me. This is what I'm trying to do for the last couple of months to establish better tooling for this, because there's only a couple of people that can actually do this, and it would be great to give out something that everyone can use. But as you know, the web is like just a bunch of random tools like bolt on. They try something out. Maybe the spec is like established, but they just forgot accessibility. I think the entire canvas has a role, and that's about it. So it's
Yeah.
like a black box. But if you start mixing stuff, you can make it possible. And on Twitter, I had a couple of demos. It's not so hard with React Fiber. We also developed some things that help. There's a library that we made called Drei. It's German for three, and has lots of helpers and so on. And this one allows you to easily like bind HTML to a Three.js component.
Hmm.
So now you can separate between visuals or graphics and layout and typography. So people can select with their cursors, and
Hmm.
screen readers can get roles and so on. But behind, I don't know, some crazy shader stuff, whatever. So at least this is possible. And in the super professional sites I've seen, even the graphics, they just put an invisible div on top of it or something like this. So it has a role. It's accessible to screen readers. There's alt text content. Uh, yeah, it's possible, but it's all a workaround because the spec doesn't do it.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. It's
Mm.
almost I think can imagine that like some things you really couldn't make accessible, like a game. I don't know. That would be a very difficult thing to make accessible by
Yeah.
blind people.
Also, not sure if it makes sense because you have depth.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that would be extremely difficult.
Mm.
Just yeah, that's tough. What about I think I'm kind of coming down to the last little bit of things I was curious about for now before I dive in, and then if, you'll
Mm.
probably never hear the enemy if I really jump in. But what about automated testing? Do you have any, like, is there any reasonable way to test your React 3 Fiber like components that I write?
Yes, it's the same. You can use just, and that's about it. You can make snapshot testing, unit testing, whatever you want. You don't need something like React Testing Library because I'm not so well acquainted with this stuff, but I think something like Enzyme and React Testing Library, I think they emulate the DOM, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because Node doesn't have this and that.
Well, technically it's JS DOM that emulates the DOM. So
Mm.
React Testing Library
Okay,
could be run in a real browser. But yeah,
right.
like it relies on the DOM for sure.
Mm. And you don't need this because in Three.js, everything is there. It runs in Node, so testing or Jest has no problems at all. You don't need some additional thing. just the renderer or reconciler, whatever it's called these days, and Jest, and that's it. I don't know. Okay, there's no proper tooling, but you can still dive in and find stuff through children, and there's find methods and stuff like this in Three.js. So I think it's pretty easy.
Yeah, and do you have examples of tests that you've written?
Yes, in the React 3 Fiber repo, there's testing. I mean, testing because I haven't had the time to really explore it. But there's like a basic snapshot test that shows you how to do it. But I think there's not much to it. I
Okay.
think.
Cool. Yeah, that's all right.
Other people can prove me wrong, but I don't know.
Yeah, cool. Well, is there anything else about React 3 Fiber or React in general that you wanted to talk about before we wrap up?
Yeah, not so sure. Just that we're working. Yeah, maybe this. We're working right now on several tools that are coming up. One is a Flexbox tool. So this is a huge problem that you have your 3D content, but it's not responsive. Sorry, this is my German.
Yeah, that's all right.
Coming in between. So that solves that. You have real Flexbox, which is amazing. So you can have layouts, and it's responsive, adapts to browser width and so on. Generally, we are trying now to more go into this front-end dev thing. So lots of new things will come out very soon to make it easier for people to explore this 3D thing without thinking that it's just like a gimmick for games, whatever. So that's pretty important to us, to really give it into the hands of just regular front-end devs on the DOM.
That's awesome. And actually, one other thing I'm curious about. So like the typical use case for something like React 3 Fiber is within a React application, right? Like I'd have my surrounding stuff that's just DOM, and then within that there's a window of WebGL, whatever, right? And so how does that integration typically work? Because we've got React DOM rendering everything. Would I have a component that then has a render with React 3 Fiber, like within a use effect or something like that?
Right now, yes, you have a component called Canvas. You just drop it into your React DOM tree structure, and everything that resides within is rendered out by the React 3 Fiber renderer, so meshes and so on. But in the upcoming version, we're going to split this. So you have both. You can export render, just like React DOM.render. You can say React 3 Fiber.render. And then you can do stuff without relying on the DOM, because it's like, 40 kilobytes these days?
Yeah.
So you can shave that off if you don't need it.
Sure. So like if you had an application that was 100% just 3D, you just, that makes sense. Very cool. Well, cool. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time to talk about this, frankly, really amazing stuff. I'm excited now to try actually building something. I remember I did a Hello World in React VR, and just it blew my mind that it was so easy to do that. And using the same simple primitives that I'm used to from React. So I will try this out, and maybe I'll do like a super simple start to React 3 Fiber. I like making those little blog posts. So anyway, fun stuff, man. Thank you so much for letting me have some of your time, and we'll see you all on the internet.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.